I think the approach of acceptance to failure is the best an organization can take with respect to increasing innovation and creativity. 100%, allowing opportunity for individuals to fail and not, not feel as though their jobs are at stake, or they're going to be in any way kind of ridiculed or punished for not coming up with the best and brightest ideas every week, because we know creativity takes time, right?
Welcome to The Brew. I'm your host, Valtteri Salamäki, and today we are joined by our managing partners, Nikhil and Luis, as well as a UCR professor. We have Dr. Kyle Ingram. We're very excited to have you on the show for today.
Excited to be here.
Oh, yeah. And before we get started, we just really wanted to make a quick announcement. Last week, we actually finally hit Twitch affiliate, so thank you very much for everybody who continues to tune in and engage with our show. As for today's show, if you have any questions throughout, as we do for every single episode, throw them in the chat. We like to answer questions live. We want to engage with our audience. So if you have anything you want to ask, whether it be ourselves or Dr. Kyle Ingram, please throw it in the chat. But to get started, I think it would be best to have you introduce a little bit about yourself, a little bit about your background before we dive into organizational behavior.
Okay, wow. Well, thank you very much. It's incredible to be here. It's wonderful to see some former students doing some incredible things in the world. And also to those that are listening, some former students I've seen on LinkedIn post that they would be listening and tuning in today. So that's pretty exciting for me. So for those of you that don't know, I did my PhD in organizational behavior at the London School of Economics in political science. So actually spent about a third of my life in the UK. So kind of gaining perspective around interpersonal leadership, which is the area I typically kind of study. One area that I hope that we get into at some stage today is relational ambivalence. So this is a construct that I came up with during my PhD, where I uncovered that we have these kind of love-hate relationships with our boss. There's a lot of research that talks about, what does it mean to be a good leader? And of course, a lot around what it means to be a bad leader. And then there's this kind of gray area. I was talking to a number of different kind of senior vice presidents, normal human beings, right? Anybody out there that wants to talk about their boss, which a lot of people, it turns out people like to talk about their boss, and kind of uncovered that there are so many people that don't have a lot of clarity regarding what the relationship is with their manager or their supervisor or their leader in their organization. So I started studying these kind of love-hate relationships and what leads to a situation where the relationship is undefined and sort of the antecedents and the consequences of relationships of that type. So it's been kind of a long journey to end up back in California. So I was just away for a year with King's College. So if you're listening from King's College, I'm glad you're here. So I was with them for a year and returned to the UK just recently for the fall quarter.
Awesome. So obviously you transitioned from Riverside being very, very hot weather. How was the transition go from Riverside to the UK and then now coming back?
I have to say the second time it was more of a shock. After 2 years in California, so there was 11 years in the UK, 2 years in California, and then back out to the UK for a year. I have to say it was pretty tough, right? So they have in between 200 to 300 days of kind of overcast. And for me, being a bit of a sun worshiper, that was a bit of a challenge. So, yeah. But, we've got the heat in Riverside, which I love as well.
Yeah, no, obviously.
One thing I want to touch on is what brought you back to UC Riverside, and I think Southern California and this kind of area as a whole. Like, what made you go from... you're in the UK for 11 years, you come over here to start teaching and doing research, you go back for an opportunity, and then there at the opportunity you realize some things. What brought you back here?
That's a great question. So I always knew, actually this is kind of a little bit of a backstory. I've got some good friends that live here in California that even when I was living in the UK, I would come to visit annually. And we were all kind of living in different areas. They weren't in San Diego where I presently live. We were kind of spread out all over the world, and we kind of we vacationed together in nearby Encinitas, I think it was. And we looked around at the table at dinner one day, and we were just like, why don't we all just live here? And, you know, this is a beautiful life. Why wouldn't we try to make this happen? And so one by one, we slowly kind of started looking for jobs in the area. Obviously, academic jobs, if you don't know, are few and far between. They're not easy to get. So I had, you know, networks out there, people that were kind of looking on my behalf as well for jobs that came out. And then Riverside appeared. When I looked into Riverside, I immediately fell in love with the university itself and what it stands for. Especially around its approach to diversity and inclusion. And so for me, that was an immediate attraction. After accepting the job here and working for 2 years and then going away, that reality became even more clear to me. Just how, not that my experience in London was bad, because it wasn't, it was extremely rewarding. But to leave a situation that was pretty wonderful anyway, and then to return, it had a meaningful kind of feeling for me. I love our students. I love, I love the change that is happening so rapidly here at Riverside. We're if you don't know, the business school is rapidly growing.
Yep.
You know, we're rising in the rankings almost every year. And to me, that's wonderful. And the outreach that occurs at this university is just fantastic. So I feel the fit is here. And I don't know if we'll get into that topic, but person-organization fit is really key to a lot of outcomes, mostly around life and job satisfaction.
Absolutely. I think, honestly, we should jump into that, like, first thing first, unless you had something you wanted to...
No, go for it, man.
I think that actually might be the best thing to jump into, is that fit. Because as of right now, because of COVID, a lot of people have taken a step back and reevaluated what they want to do, whether it be from the job they're currently at and looking at new opportunities, whether it be they're struggling to get a job and they're seeing, like, should I pursue a graduate degree? But that fit into a company, I think is so important, because when we're young, we're looking at what do I make money off of when I go to college? I'm going to study this, and this, and I want to get this job because it pays really nice and it has the glamour behind it. But a lot of people that go that route tend to not be happy where they're working because of the fact that they're going to a job that satisfies their need for financial needs, but nothing else, and that's not enough. So, from your research and from your background, when somebody's going through this process of, like, trying to find that fit, how do they go about it?
That's really good. Yeah. So I get this question a lot, as you can imagine, from students, especially like we were all in this situation. You know, all of you in this room were at this position at some stage. It usually happens around your junior year. Even for me, I had no idea I wanted to even pursue a PhD at that stage, right? And so I feel like the most important thing, especially now, I mean, we kind of look at the door being closed right now with COVID, but I feel like there are more opportunities than ever before, because we can begin kind of working for any organization around the world that are recruiting sort of globally and not just at the local level. And I just had this conversation yesterday with a student that's trying to make a decision about grad school. Well, she was asking me, I don't know if she's listening, but she was asking me about the difference between, pursuing a career in clinical psychology versus IO psychology. And I was like, well, those are very different. Yeah. So you got to make a decision now if you're going to, what type of people you want to be working with. But I would say there's more opportunity now. In terms of fit, I would, for me personally, I would look deeply into the culture of the organization, right? And that's very easy it's not easy to uncover, actually, I should say, because organizations put out all the positive information, like anybody, right? They want to recruit people. And so they put out as much positive information as possible, what it's like to work for that organization. But smarter organizations are utilizing, social media. They're utilizing various different means that will be deemed attractive to sort of future employees, that reveal a little bit more about what it might be like to work for that particular organization, and catch those news stories, right? Because you don't want to be, working for an organization that ultimately you kind of disagree with their values. Because that will surface, right? Ultimately, you will feel that being kind of filtered from the top of the organization down to those that really, let's face it, at the grassroots feel it the most. And you will immediately kind of feel some levels of dissatisfaction, maybe even life satisfaction, questioning what you've done when you join an organization where that fit is not present. So long story short, I guess, is do your research and don't feel like the door is closed. Feel like you are of value. You have something to contribute. You have an asymmetric control over a resource that organization needs. So think of yourself as value, and then you'll be sort of located in an organization that you desire.
And I think that's so important what you just brought up, which is a lot of students, when they're going to their first job specifically, they think that company has leverage over them. So
Exactly.
they're immediately thinking that I just need to get there and nothing else really matters, and that I need to present myself to them, not as in you have your own leverage as the individual, you're creating labor for them so that you have that skill set to push back. Because my favorite question that I asked when I was interviewing before for like Esri and I was working there was, I always asked when at the end, like, do you have any questions for us? I always asked what their values were, because I'm always very value driven. And that's how we built out our company Free Logic is we want to make sure every single person we add to the team believes in the same causes and believes in the same vision, because it allows for us to move as a company faster in the same direction without us butting heads and all this. And everybody is happier, and we're doing these check-ins and making sure that everybody aligns with it. But yeah, I think that's great advice. Do you guys have anything to add for like finding that fit? Especially, I mean, I think we can talk a little bit about like your fit for like Deloitte a little bit, because we talked about last week why we left tech companies to build our own company. But Luis, do you have anything to add?
I was actually going to bring up last week's conversation that we had just about that. This kind of finding that fit, I know for me it was more a very weird kind of combination of things, where it was when I was at the job, before COVID, I didn't realize that I was maybe not valuing my happiness as much as I should be. And then COVID happened, and then working from home, you start to realize, okay, well, one, you realize a lot of the stuff that you could do in an office, like 99% you could do at home, regardless of I think, industry, unless you're doing very hands-on, like construction or things like that. But I think majority of work can be done remotely. So that was the first thing I realized. I was like, okay, cool. Like if push come to shove, I could always just work from home. But then after it went from working from home into a furlough, then it was like, now I'm not working anymore. And then you have some time where you have like the 1 week where all you do is just like sit on the couch, eat hot Cheetos, and like watch Netflix. And then after that week passes and you start to realize, oh, actually I like working. Like I want to start doing stuff. You, at least for me, I say you, but I'm speaking to myself here. I definitely realized some things. So I went back to doing journaling, a lot of introspection, seeing really what I wanted to do. Like that's obviously you start to kind of plan. You don't want to I'm not just going to sit there and twiddle my thumbs and hope that my furlough ends. You start making plans. You start going, okay, worst case scenario, I have to go and enter the workforce again. I have to go look for a job. So you start really writing down like, okay, what are my, looking at this job that I have now, what are my things that I want to keep and what are my things that I want to take away, things that I could alleviate for myself given the opportunity, if I could make that decision. And you start just seeing that list start tacking on, like at one after one after one after one after one, and you start to realize that the things that you sometimes get so caught up in the monotony of work and task that you stop to realize how much it's actually impacting you. And I think that the reason why pays come twice a month is because right when you start to feel a little bit of like, is this what I want to do for the rest of my life? That's when bam, the money hits your bank account.
Right.
And you go, oh yeah, this is definitely what I want to do for the rest of my life. This is fine. I'm okay with this. And then you kind of go about your next 2 weeks and you start to go into the dip, and then money, bam, you're right back up. Right. No, and this is a very real thing, but like now that the money was no longer coming from that source, that's when you very objectively can look at something and go, actually, this is maybe not what I thought in my head was the best thing. And then you start to look back, and we've had this conversation before, all the three of us, we start to look back at moments that you thought were every day, and you start to go, that wasn't okay. Like this moment that I just brushed off and said, oh, that's just, hey, it's my job. You start to go, actually, that was not my job. I for some reason felt a responsibility to make that my job for whatever multitude of reasons that you can kind of give there. But yeah, I think fit now for sure, looking back and kind of having that experience, having that behind you, fit is one of the most crucial things in the world. Yeah. I think even pushing that a little bit further, it's you kind of touched on it, is like this over glamification of the job. So you could, in theory, I don't want to say you got tricked into a job, because you sign the contract, you do your research, you don't really get tricked, more so than that's just a choice that you made.
Right. Well, you could be blinded by excitement.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So if that could happen, and then you go into the job, and just enter this kind of monotonous everyday, I'm just existing right now kind of thing. I think it's important to not just look for fit, but to consistently reevaluate your fit within the actual organization, and understand, write down, these are my key morals going in. These are my absolutes. This is what I'm gonna kind of stay to, and then revisit that 3 months in, and see if you maybe shifted on some of those positions. And if it's things that you told yourself you would never shift from, maybe start to ask yourself if the place that you're in is actually the right fit, or if you were blinded by excitement at the beginning there.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So going back to what you were saying, I think when I was a junior at UCR is when I started to realize where like my career was starting to go. That's when I got my internship at Deloitte, and then from there I got my full-time position there. So I think looking back, I agree with what you're saying. It's like there's this surface level look into what the company is from like social media and what they tell you at career fairs and what they tell the interns and stuff. And even during the internship, you don't get a full, I guess, perspective of the company. You get the shiny stuff. Like they treated their interns pretty nice. Yep. So at that same time, I also didn't understand the value of values in a company. The value of like culture in a company. For me, it was more of, this is going to be a great launching pad for me. I'm going to learn a lot. It's a big company. And you know, my parents are going to be proud of me, that kind of thing, right?
Right.
So,
What
was that?
It does play a big role.
It does. It absolutely does. So, I spent about a year, 13 months at the firm after my internship, and I think I quickly realized a few months in that I didn't necessarily belong there. Yes, I was learning, and yes, I was struggling for all the right reasons, but I just couldn't see a future there for myself. And I think that ultimately stemmed down to the values of the company. Now, as I said last week, it might have been very different had we not been building Free Logic at the same time, because we started that during my junior year. So it was all happening in parallel. But I guess what I saw was that over here in the startup, we are all aligned. We're all headed towards the same mission, and we have something big and great going. And there's just so much more happiness when I'm thinking about this startup versus the work that I have to do in this company. So that's eventually how I came down to the decision that I'm going to leave Deloitte. So I left in August, and now we're doing this full time. And I think the values and the team that we're building here is what's moving us all forward. And we're all like so much more productive than we used to be now that we're all like bought into this.
Yeah. I would say to kind of both of your points, relationships with organizations are idiosyncratic in nature, right? So we all have our own kind of experience and perception of what our life within that organization is like. And that can shift. It's not overnight, right? It's not that sort of your first couple of weeks working for your organization, you're like, yeah, I made the right decision, right? This is where I should be forever. It's kind of that natural progression that organizations let their guard down in the same way that we do, right? We see the elements of, let's call it organizational personality, right? Who this organization actually is slowly revealed to you, right? And the more time that you spend working for that organization, the more likely that will be uncovered. So I think it's very natural for you to experience that and to kind of question and continue to question early on whether or not you've made an accurate decision with respect to this organization. I think some key indicators would be monitoring your own behavior, right? So how has your motivation changed? How is your level of commitment, dedication? I keep coming back to levels of satisfaction, but are you going into work to just get paid, right? That says a lot. if I'm just going into work to get paid, then is this the thing that I want to be doing for the rest of my life? Because not only your relationship with your organization will change, but also the relationship with those throughout your organization will change. They'll be like, why did Luis, he used to be so sociable and care about relatedness and, maybe even grabbing a drink after work or whatever. But now
I never let that skip.
yeah,
That was the
even
one
when you
thing.
were
That was my one thing that I never let slip from my grasp.
Good.
Yeah.
But yeah, we can slip into those. In the literature, they refer to it as an economic exchange relationship, right? So moving away from trying to develop a long-term relational contract with our organization and then slowly realizing, actually, my relationship is quite transactional here. And whether you can sustain that. There are people that's their life and that's happy. That's a happy place for them. So if it's not, however, I think like Nikhil, it's a good time to question whether it's time to move on.
Yeah.
I just always think of accountants. I know we bag on them like every week, but my goodness. Do we? I think so. I think it's a weekly thing.
I think it's just you, man.
I think it's just because I tried it for a little bit. Like I was like, you know what, dude? Accountants make decent money. I'm gonna give it a whirl. Actually give it the old college try. And I was like, I can't do this. I was like a weekend, and I was like, I'm gonna go to sleep.
And it depends on the person. Like for example,
Some
my brother is super happy doing accounting because my brother is he's structural, he's organized, and it gives him purpose to do that. Like he feels happy doing that, and he's good at it. So yeah, for me, I could never do it.
Literally, all of my family is in payroll. Like I'm the only.
Maybe that's why you have so much beef with it.
I think it might be. Yeah. Like all my sisters are in payroll in some way, shape, or form. There's just two. My dad and my youngest sister are the two who aren't in payroll, but it's like that's what I grew up on. Looking at them doing taxes. My sister still does my taxes. It's like I don't even touch it. I just give her all the paperwork and go, here you go, figure it out.
That's nice.
Yeah, it's
That's
nice.
Yeah. That's saving so much money on your end. I'll do it, but my brother will charge me.
Well, I give her money. Like it's not like a here you go, give you a handshake kind of thing. Like it's something. But no, I think that's why I'm a little bit weird about it.
A little salty about it. I like that. But I mean, yeah, no, like this conversation is especially important because, especially for Gen Z audiences, they're now looking for like the happiness factor more than ever before. It's really shifting from that transactional to the satisfaction side of things. But to kind of go off of that, as you brought up, is like you have to have that alignment in the company, and it's a two-part issue. So it's not only the employee, but it's also those who lead the company that have to look back down and structure in that way so that people want to stay and you don't have these high turnover rates and you're organizing your company in that way. So that's where I would like to shift the conversation, because especially for us internally within Free Logic, we've figured out that everybody has the same values and we're going towards the same mission. But now it's really organizing our company in the way that we can sustain that. And as we grow, it doesn't hinder that factor. Because right now, with a small team, it's very doable.
Yeah.
But as your team gets bigger and bigger and bigger, more issues come about. How you organize things, how are you assigning work, what are people's strengths, and how can you make sure that they're aligning with their strengths, but they still feel comfortable doing things that might be uncomfortable for them so that they can still grow and learn. Because if everybody is just comfortable where they're at, then the company also can't grow. So I one thing I'm very curious about is how should a company approach that? Like it's obviously a very big question.
It is a very big question. Yeah. Well, because I study micro-organizational behavior, right? So I can only kind of view it with my expertise. Otherwise, we can throw opinion out.
Yeah.
But for so from my expertise, I mean, not my expertise, but from a micro-organizational behavior perspective, I would say you're absolutely right. You hit the nail on the head with respect to, at this stage, you can design your team exactly how you want it, right? So you looked at those values early on. You decided these are the type of people that I want to work with. But as that organization grows, it does become a bit of a selection thing, right? So how are you going about selecting individuals to work for this organization? Not just yours, but more broadly, right? As organizations grow. I think one key thing that you can do to kind of maintain that apart from selection is, of course, we've already touched on the meaningfulness of work, right? So whether or not we're establishing that kind of need for achievement, whether or not that's being felt through members throughout your organization. But another key factor is ensuring that level of interdependence still exists, right? So that people feel that there is kind of this quid pro quo relationship with each other, that I'm actually providing for my team as much as my team is providing me, right? That I serve a real purpose here. And as your organization expands, it might be worthwhile kind of creating smaller teams. It would be my kind of advice, right? So that they don't get lost in kind of the what can happen when organizations expand beyond a certain number, right? What that number is, nobody is specific about typically. But in terms of maintaining that interdependence and purpose, I would say kind of think about selection and breaking down your teams into smaller numbers.
Okay, yeah, because the one approach we want to take is really leveraging the Google model, which is you have your organization structure from the top, but then you start splitting them into different pods and departments for different projects. So as we're going through our current rebrand process, one thing which we're going to establish is the split between content creators versus consultants, or those that are actually working directly with the businesses versus those that are more behind the scenes and creating the content for it. Because the skill sets are different, the teams are growing differently, and it doesn't make sense to try to intertwine them because, as you brought up, it might create this kind of chaos within the company. But then also as for like micro projects, because one thing we really want to do as a company is be able to work on smaller scale startup ideas in early stages and nurture them, and having people facilitate. But the reason why I think Google is so good at what they do is that, I mean, one, they have so much money that they can make this work. You need a lot of capital to make this model work, but their entire structure is you come to us with a team, you pitch an idea, we'll put the team together. If you're missing competencies, we'll throw that into the team. You run on your own as kind of an independent company, and here's $1 million to make it happen.
Right.
And I like that model because it's the reason why it's so great is that, I mean, a lot of them are going to fail. Like their ideas are going to fail, but what it does is it makes that pain point of failure get away from that company, that organization. So do you see that that's an approach that companies should be taking, is eliminating that risk factor from if a project fails, that it doesn't create this dissatisfaction within the entire company. It's more as in like that micro pod that's responsible for it.
I think the approach of acceptance to failure is the best an organization can take with respect to increasing innovation and creativity. 100%, allowing opportunity for individuals to fail and not feel as though their jobs are at stake, or they're going to be in any way kind of ridiculed or punished for not coming up with the best and brightest ideas every week, because we know creativity takes time, right? And this isn't, I know you've brought up creativity and innovation in the tech industry, but, organizations that allow for mistakes create a really interesting culture, right? So not just in tech or innovation, but, I know of other organizations that have promoted individuals to senior managers. I'm actually writing a really interesting case study right now on an organization who promoted an individual to a senior management role, and the individual didn't do it so well. They couldn't handle kind of the stress involved, and kind of made quite a few mistakes that were costly to the organization. Now, most organizations could say, you messed up, and we're going to demote you or ask you to leave the organization because you're clearly not right for us. This particular organization instead said, let's take a step back, right? Take a breather. Let's put you back in your old role, see how that goes. Then they sent this individual to a leadership course within organization. And I love, personally, because I do interpersonal leadership, I love when organizations have their own leadership development centers. So this very large organization, typically is the case, sent her off to this leadership training. And she ended up performing better than any candidate that had ever taken that course. So what did they do? They put her back into that senior management role, post-leadership training, and now she's thriving. So I think that, and by the way, in conversations with this person, they are so affectively in love with their organization now for that second chance. So that's why I say whether it's tech or innovation or creativity, every organization should be thinking about, how do we run these second opportunities or third opportunities for our staff so they don't feel threatened, as if their job won't exist if they make a mistake.
Yeah, I mean, I think that really cuts into, we talked about here, like imposter syndrome and stuff like that I think ends up happening a lot with these big time promotions when you're entering now like senior blah 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 levels, where when you get there you might be thriving in one space, and then you get bumped up to the next one, and immediately like I shouldn't be here. So I'm gonna just try to self-sabotage myself as much as I possibly can, because for some reason the brain works like that. That along with that, I mean, you can tell me, but I don't know how much. I've heard this theory of everybody who's in the position they're in now isn't the most optimal person for it, because you, through the promotion process, you do really well in one position, and that's the person who's thriving in one position is the person who gets uprooted and put in a different position. Exactly. Where eventually, going off of just kind of some napkin logic here, you're going to get to the point where the person who was now at peak thriving can no longer, like, they've reached their capacity, and they might end up in a senior vice president position that they're not fit for, but they're perfectly fit for the position right underneath that. Right. I think there's a lot of kind of things at play here, and I'm curious about your opinion on that little theory I had there.
I think it's theory. I think it's pretty empirical. I don't think it's just
it's
a
not
theory.
It's not napkin theory.
No. I think you could publish that. Well, I think it's been published several times, but absolutely, imposter syndrome. This is why you've probably heard this, Nikhil, and others, and the story of when I did executive coaching. And by the way, if you're looking, no, I'm just kidding. But when I did some executive coaching with senior vice presidents, that was one of the things that they said time and time again, right? Was I was promoted into this position because of my expertise in a given area, leaving that thing that I was really the most interested in doing. And now, how in the world do I manage a team? How do I develop these interpersonal relationships with people? How do I, you name it, so many questions. And many of these individuals end up going back to executive coaching to figure that kind of stuff out, or listening more in organizational behavior right now when you have the opportunity. To be trained into that position, right? That would be my perspective.
Yeah, it's definitely one of those things that, for sure, for me, it's like, what do you do? Like, let's say theoretically, like I'm someone who's an expert and is someone who's being kind of pinged for an executive role. Like, how often does it happen where someone just says no? I'm not going to leave my role here because I'm really good at what I do here. And to that end, what kind of flavor does that put in the organization that they're like, oh, this person doesn't actually like, it's this big mix that's just constantly bouncing in my brain of just like, if you were to get hired and you're doing really good, why can't you just stay there? Like, get more like, if you're doing a really good job, get a bonus, get more money. And if the job is already looking at you for a promotion, they're obviously valuing you enough for that. Monetarily speaking, they're valuing you. Cannot say that word today. For that amount of money. So even some kind of bonus, I think would make sense to me. But I think this makes a lot of sense in like the engineering kind of software world, where like if you have one person who's just like the end all beat all of like website development, or even just like front end or back end or full stack, whatever it is, and that person just really wants to keep doing that, I see no reason on why you would promote that person. Give them as much like bonuses, give them as much like, oh, you're doing such a good job, as much positive affirmation as you can. Let them know that they are valued, and just because they're not receiving the promotion, like all this stuff, right? But yeah, I've always wondered that, like, why, if you think that where you're at now is like the place to be,
why move it?
Yeah, why move it?
Well, I think sometimes that's thrust upon you, right? So I think in many situations, your organization approaches those that are performing well for a reason, right? They want you to eventually sort of lead a team that will have that same sort of impact, right? That there'll be kind of this contagious effect of your kind of ability to perform within that organization and how that might relate to a team. So from the organization's perspective, of course they want to promote you. Of course they want to put you into a position where they can continue to draw on the asset that you've created for the organization. Now, the other thing, though, is I think most individuals would self-select into a position like that, right? So I don't think in many cases organizations are going to say, we want you to be as well. They might have these sidebar conversations, but they're going to advertise for various leadership positions throughout the organization, and those that are interested in that level of promotion will step up, right? So it could be around self-selection. But I think you also hit on another good point that's kind of been a theme throughout our conversation here, is remembering that those individuals have their own individual goals, right? And if they feel as though they are being promoted into a role that does not meet or match those individual goals, then what's going to happen? They're not going to last in that position. They're probably going to think about exiting until that huge paycheck comes around.
Yeah, and then it's like, oh, this isn't too bad.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. Nick, you have anything to say?
I was just like listening to you guys because it was a very interesting conversation. I think something slightly different that kind of popped up in my head was like, in those situations where, say, you're like a web developer who's more focused on just putting in the code and you're really good at it. I'm kind of generalizing here, but you might not necessarily have those leadership skills to be promoted and become a manager, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, you deserve to get promoted. You deserve to get more recognition and like a more responsibility. But putting this person that I'm talking about into that managerial role is probably not the best thing to do because they don't know how to like lead, right? Mm-hmm. So in those situations, it's what you guys were saying. I think it makes sense, like just providing more responsibility in what they're doing currently and providing more incentives to keep up the good work, basically.
Right.
Yeah, I always feel like the crux to a lot of big like managerial, supervisor, whatever kind of roles is when it's a shift from. It's a big shift mentally, I think, going from, oh, now I just have more responsibilities to now I actually have a team that I am in charge of. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the crux of a lot of people. It's you go from worrying about yourself, this is a very individualistic sport, to now you're running a team. And that is, I think, the intimidating thing for a lot of people. Yeah. Mm-hmm. It's like, and I think it's why you have to kind of ask yourself, if you're someone who is thinking about shifting over to a position where you're going to be managing other people, is it really, are you somebody who can build interpersonal relationships? Because that's, at the end of the day, I think so. This is me coming from my very like biased perspective of like what you need to be able to, at least, I wouldn't say manage people, but just like interact with a team. Mm-hmm. You just need to be able to, like, being very like frank here, like be able to have a conversation, be able to listen, and then I think the work comes through understanding that it needs to get done. Yeah. That's just me personally. It's so I think it's you nurture a relationship, whether that's however the multitude of ways you can actually have a relationship, and then you just kind of gel with each other, and then it's like, oh, this task just came and we have to do it, and it's like, okay, well, you do this, you do that, you do this, you just delegate, and then you figure it out, you find out who does what good, and then you start shifting some roles around. Right. But I think that's the big crux for a lot of people is going from that mental thing of I'm alone, and now all of a sudden you're in a village.
Yeah. You brought up imposter syndrome before, so in your experience, in your studies, how common is imposter syndrome in general, not even just with promotions?
I think it's more common than people would lead on.
Yeah.
I don't have any direct studies to refer to on this, but I think it becomes most obvious in situations where people feel slightly threatened, right? Or they feel as though their expertise are not of a certain level in comparison to other team members. I think it's more natural. I mean, I talk to my colleagues all the time, and we're talking, professors and PhDs and all that kind of stuff. We supposedly know things, right? But even when we attend conferences, right? We, especially as assistant professors, attending conferences, still trying to make a name for ourselves. Even though we've come this far in life, we still feel, that level of imposter syndrome, right? So what are we doing talking to this senior professor who's been established in the field and has their kind of own views? We even say when we're giving a talk, oh, so-and-so's in the audience today, right? So they're probably going to come down hard on us, right? So I think it does exist more than you actually than we're actually aware of. And I think it's good that you point this out, because I think organizations should be aware of the fact that individuals might be feeling that within their throughout the organization. I also wanted to come back to your point, Luis, because I think that you viewed that in a Luis way.
How is that?
Very relational, right? So you're good at that side, right? So I think you would be capable. And you said, something really interesting that you said was there are many pathways to manage these relationships, right? But somebody who is task-oriented will not see it that way, right? So they might be promoted to this position as team leader because they're so good at that task, right? And so then how do we conquer those fears if they have them, right? They might not even be aware that they have them.
Yeah.
How do we address those fears when I'm a task-oriented leader that knows that all I care about is getting the job done, but then you've got personality A, B, C, D, and E with value A, B, C, D, and E, and we have to work together on this project. So that's kind of an open question from my side.
I think everyone has their own experiences and their own kind of answer with that. Val, do you want to kick it off or just go around?
I like how you turn it right on me. You're like, hey, you go first.
Yeah, and then I think Nikhil goes after you, and then I'll
you'll end
go to the bathroom.
Yeah. Okay.
Closing arguments from it. I think that's. I mean, and this goes back to my point, which is I wish there was more organizational behavior classes during my MBA studies specifically for this, because, and those that are listening right now, if you're a business student, take organizational behavior classes. And the reason I'm saying that is it might not feel relevant when you first join a company, but it's very important once you start leading teams. And especially internally in a startup, organizational behavior are always the biggest question marks we have. But as to your question of, if everybody has different skill sets and it's someone who's task oriented, and how do they actually go about that? I think the main thing there is, one, really learning and identifying everybody's strengths and weaknesses and putting them in the position to win. And that's always my biggest thing, is like, if you're going to organize a group, and that a very diverse group, and they all have different skill sets, they all have different personalities, you don't want to put people into situations where they feel that they're going to get that imposter syndrome, or they're going to butt heads. So what I tend to look at is, I'm going to look at, you have a very good skill set in banter, and you have a very skill set of rational thought. So if you two were together, yes, that's good, because you have different skill sets. But the worry that I would have is that he would override you with his banter, and that would think that. You would think that. But did you see the over/under episode? I know that was brutal. That was brutal.
You would think that.
But that's what I would probably be looking at, and it's hard because as someone who's task oriented, you might not be able to identify these things, and I think that's the biggest question mark for your question, is like, how does that person who's task oriented, who just cares about it getting done, look at his team? But I think that's where they would have to learn those skills to identify not just the skill set, but the personality of the individuals on your team, and put them in a situation where they can be collaborative and be in the best position to win. And that was actually one thing I really did appreciate from my MBA studies, is learning kind of like the alpha personality versus beta personality in that case, because if you have too many alphas in one group, they're not going to get anything done, because they're going to try to go all into different directions. Some people are way better at following orders, and some people are giving orders. So if I was to organize that, that's the first thing I would identify, is just who is better at leading the team versus who's better at following the instructions of the team, and then putting them into subgroups. But if you need like 6 or 7 people to do that task, that's what I still want to learn. Honestly, I think that's where I wish I had more education about, because it's hard. It's really hard, because I'm always thinking of, I want to best position everybody to succeed, but sometimes I need somebody to do something that they might not necessarily know yet, but they have to learn it. And who do I put to do that?
Right. And, on top of that, we're oftentimes, you said the alpha personality, but also we can think big 5 as well, right? So thinking about those introverts in the group, how do you bring them into the conversation? Remembering, so I teach a course in designing and leading teams. And we spend the first 3 or 4 weeks ensuring that we tackle the relatedness component, right? The relationships and the social side, which is really difficult for those task-oriented individuals. They see the value in it, absolutely, but they also, not surprisingly, think it's a waste of time. However, we know if we combat those relational issues early on, then we're less likely to experience conflict within the team later on. We know who is capable of doing what because we've spent the time understanding not only their values, but what they're capable of doing. And the key, what's important for all team success? Everybody contributing, right? So my willingness to actually share, I know at the very beginning we said everybody has an asymmetric control over a resource, right? Mm-hmm. My willingness to share that resource comes from trust.
Yep.
And if I can't trust my team members, then I'm probably not going to be as willing to share that information. And I might even create my own individual goals and start working for the organization versus my team.
And I think that's probably always my biggest concern is when you are trying to do a task is the individual perspective of this is what I want, not this is what we want. Mm-hmm. And that's obviously the bigger the group, the harder it is to get to that, because it always becomes like you're going to take your own personal ambitions over the group's ambitions. But to kind of tie into that, do you think is that why it's so vitally important for companies to do like retreats and like getaways and like away from just the company? Like, for example, if it wasn't for COVID, I would love to just like grab beers with the team after like we have a long work day and stuff like that. So it's something that's nothing to do with the work, but we can still see each other's personalities and build that relationship. Do you think that's very important in companies? Because one thing I do see a lot of companies say is that they want to split the professional from the personal. I get that as well, but I think that causes that exact conflict that we're talking about by splitting it so heavily and just saying that when I'm here, this is for work. When I'm not here, you don't know anything about my life. Yeah.
Well, you're talking to a leadership and culture person, so I 100% agree with those opportunities to bond, right? Now, every leader's going to have a different view on this, and the extent to which they want to be transparent with their own lifestyle is kind of a personal choice. When it comes to those drinks after work, I know leaders that will not engage in that because and it's actually it's really clever in some respects, because what they're allowing is by not joining in, they're allowing their teams to kind of talk about their leader. And sometimes just talking about their leader in the absence of the leader is quite a cohesive thing to do. Right. So I believe in that, the interpersonal side for sure. I believe that it enables us to kind of get through those issues around conflict that perhaps wouldn't exist if we didn't spend that time.
Got it.
Yeah.
I agree too. If there's one thing, I mean, there's multiple things, but if there's one thing that I did like about my work experience at Deloitte was that there was, focus on interpersonal relationships before COVID. It was a little too much for my introverted self, but I did realize as soon as COVID hit how valuable that those after work dinners and happy hours were, because in like consulting, we're constantly switching projects and stuff. I probably had like 2 or 3 different projects after COVID. I didn't know my team, right? And oftentimes just had Zoom calls without any video camera or anything. So it was just like, I don't even know what this guy really looks like. And we're just talking. And it's like, I found it much easier to, I guess, get acquainted with the team's goals once I got to know the people I was working with. Yeah. But when I didn't, it was more of like, okay, I'm in California. This person is in New York, and this guy's 3 hours ahead of me. He wants to finish the workday before me. So I'm going to wake up at 7 just to do what he wants me to, so now I'm just ranting, but like.
I thought that was okay.
Yeah. I thought it was going somewhere.
It's a little group therapy for Nikhil.
It was kind of going somewhere, but I was like, where am I going with this? But anyway, I agree. Those happy hours are important, and hopefully we can start doing more of those soon.
They're critical, man. It's yes. And to answer Val, I'm not just gonna thrust it on you. At least for me, when the only time I've ever had an opportunity to build a bigger team was when I was at Valley, at San Bernardino Valley College, and that like it was strange for me because it was my first time ever not like I'm actually building the team, where I'm not just kind of given an intern and they're like here you go, figure it out. Where it's like, no, I'm the person that's looking at the candidate, I'm doing the interviewing, I'm the person who's selecting. So when that happened, and this is true for all my interviews. I'm speaking to the camera now because if you ever get a chance to interview with me, get ready for what I'm about to tell you. because the interview literally just, I go, tell me about yourself. What do you like to do? What are your hobbies? Make me laugh. Like literally, it's
Wow.
like
No pressure.
Yeah, no pressure.
I don't say the make me laugh part, but it's like you just tell me about yourself. Like and it's something I realized at first when I was first doing those interviews, is this sort of like because I immediately want to build a relationship. If I can see that there's a barrier or a wall there to me building that relationship, or there's something that I can foresee as an issue, that's like immediately kind of I get a bit like skittish about that, just because it's like at the end of the day you have to be able to have a at least somewhat lower walled conversation with somebody that you're trying to build some kind of cohesive relationship with. I think at least it doesn't mean your walls have to be 100% down. It just means you have to be able to put your head over the wall and actually see them face to face.
Right.
So that's kind of my things that I look for. And then when I have the team built and I'm working with them, it's constantly just kind of, I think my first week of having the team built, I had like 3 meetings in 1 week, and the meetings were just lunch. Like it wasn't like, let's figure out how to do photography and let's figure out how to write some posts for event coverage. It was, where do you guys want to go get lunch? Do you guys want to get catered? Do you guys want to go get a drink? What are we doing today? Are we just kind of walking around and kind of shooting the breeze? And after that week, you get like immediate either buy-in, and for me at least, that entire time, like we're all having fun, we're laughing, but like I'm identifying what's happening. Like who's the person who's just going to do their task?
Yeah.
Who's the person who is going to be in the office more than me because they're already bought into the actual, they've drunk the Kool-Aid, if you will. And that's just stuff that week does for me. It allows me to identify, if you want to call it like positions. I mean, I don't really see them as positions, more so than just personality types. And kind of going from there. I mean, that's the way that I kind of run it. But Nikhil, to your point, is I guess to the flip side of that coin is having these lunches and having these moments that should be very interpersonal, could also be the moment that you realize that this isn't where I want to be.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And it's something, not to just talk about you, but like it's something that when I was in LA working at a startup there, the organization fired 50% of the workforce without telling anybody, like except for like 3 people right before. Jeez. And we had a meeting. I was there. We had a marketing meeting. I was waiting on some people to get there. We're just typing away, and then my supervisor goes and says, "Oh, I just got called into a meeting. I'll be right back." My manager, then the supervisor for the marketing department, comes and says, "Hey, come with me." And I'm like, "Okay." Well, I was literally eating breakfast. I had like a bowl of cereal in front of my desk, and I remember I didn't think anything of it. So I looked at her and I said, "Should I bring my cereal?" She's like, "Don't bring your cereal." And I was like, "Okay." So I put my cereal down. I
Of course, Luis would want his cereal with it.
Yeah, because the best part about startup cultures is like I've ate so much cereal during meetings. It was fantastic. So no,
So
I was
you knew
like,
it was serious. No,
I knew it was very serious because like I've done this before, and if this is a no cereal kind of meeting, then this is bad. So I put the cereal down, but I brought my coffee. Big mistake. I was the only one that had a drink in my hand. So I was like sitting there like, yikes. So we're in this meeting, and everyone shows up, and people are like looking around like frantically to see who's in the room, and I'm like, what the hell's going on right now? And I think he was like a senior vice president, starts talking, and he goes, "If you're in this room, you're staying on the team."
Oh, wow.
Yeah, straight like that. He's like, "If you're in this room right now, you are not being fired."
Very American Idol.
Yeah. So then the frantic looking really started, and people started going like, "Oh my God, we're like verbally like we're so and so," and like that's when the realization, everyone like the energy went from like frantic to just dead, because people they saw the people who they didn't see the people who they wanted to see, and that was it.
Right.
So the room energy went completely dead. And they let us know that they were like, out of respect for the people that just got laid off, let them gather their things from their desk, and
What a strange approach.
yeah, let them gather things from their desk and let that be it. And I remember, and this is me, I wouldn't say I pride myself on relationship building, but I know I'm decent at it. I'm decent at identifying one Herculean thread that kind of touches on everybody. But it was so weird, like because it was the first time I was ever told, basically, don't talk to them. They are no longer a part of the team. That's in a very condensing it down to what was said there in that meeting was, you are on this team. They are no longer on this team. Let them get their things and leave. That's at the end of the day, distilling it down to one sentence. And I remember my manager was let go, and like he was like amazing to me. Like he was like very, very hands-on, very dedicated to making sure my experience there was well. He was gone, and so was that. Like that part of the thing was gone. So I came to terms with that. But as people were gathering their things and they were leaving, and you obviously no one listened. Like people were like hugging each other, which I think is really powerful. You know, people were like hugging each other, saying goodbye, making plans for later that night. Literally, people were like already like, okay, after 5 o'clock, where are we all gonna meet up? And sure enough, we did. We all met up somewhere. Wow. But during that time, the COO, he says, hey, we're all gonna go. I'll never forget this. I'm trying to remember the acronym real quick. Yes, CPK? Yeah. We're all gonna go to CPK, and we're all gonna just kind of try to relax a little bit, you know? And I'm sitting there like, what the hell is CPK? I'm like, what is going on right now? And so I'm downstairs now, I'm outside, and I'm hanging out with some people who got fired. They're all smoking down there, and I was like, well, I mean, I'm gonna join them. I'm just kind of hang out with them for a bit. And I just finally was like, what's CPK? And they were like, California Pizza Kitchen. And to my grave, I'll never forget that. Just say California Pizza Kitchen. Like, don't try to be cool during this weird moment, you know?
Right.
Doesn't everyone call it CPK?
Do you call it CPK?
It's CPK.
Do they?
I don't call it CPK.
It's no one ever.
Oh, there's a
called-
divide in our company right there.
Hold on, CPK?
I think there's one.
CPK?
Who goes to CPK?
I don't go to CPK.
Oh, there goes that sponsor.
Yeah. Sorry, CPK.
Sponsor us.
Please don't. So then we walk to CPK because it's very close to the office. And I remember I get there a little late. Like people were already there, and I get there late with another group of people because we're hanging out with some of the people who were let go. And we show up, and it was this weird moment where like I had a team that was about 5 people, and then I had a team that was just me and basically the marketing director. And I remember I identified her, and I sat down next to her, and sitting next to her was the like the head of people for the company. And I'm sitting there, and she's like, oh, do you want anything? There was like flatbread and drinks and all this stuff. And she looks at me, and the head of people says, I don't think we've actually been like formally introduced. And I'm like, yeah, we met like in passing, but how's it going? Nice to meet you. And then she just tells me, like, talk to me about yourself. Like, tell me about yourself. And like, I literally like, I'm very bad at like hiding my emotions on my face. And I'm sure that like immediately I was like, what are you talking about, lady? Like, why? Like I literally said to her, I'll never forget the words that came out of my mouth. I said, what do you mean? And she goes, yeah, like, what do you like to do? And I'm like, I don't know, like stuff. I literally, I was like, I don't know what I like to do, because my brain was so removed from trying to build a relationship right now that it like it blows my mind to think that the head of people for this company could so quickly just like brush it off and be like, tell me about you now that all these people are gone. What are you gonna do for you? And are you like, what are you gonna like? I honestly think that one of the reasons why I was not extended an extension on my offer there was because of that moment. Was because of me going, I don't know. Like, I don't know. I literally said, I don't know what I like to do. Right. And then I just turned around and started drinking a Long Island iced tea. With, and that's
at CPK.
Yeah, at CPK. I think about that a lot, because I think about how I never want to be that. I never want to be so removed that I can let go. Like, why? Just call a day. Like, make it no. Here, go home. Like, do that. Don't make us all gather at California Pizza Kitchen, and then 2 hours later go back to the office and then have a press conference talking about how all the people that are here, oh, they're the real team. This is the real team, you know?
Yeah, that's disheartening.
And then 2 months after that, fire 50% of that team. Thankfully, I wasn't there for that second mass exodus. It's messed up, but what I'm saying is, if that moment hadn't happened, I knew immediately after that. I was like, I'm just here for the paycheck now. I'm just here for the paycheck, and I'm here for to have that on my resume, that I worked here, because there's no way. Like, there's no way that I could look at these people, well, the higher ups, because everyone else was like regular person there, fantastic. And some of the nicest people you'll ever meet in your life. Even the CEO was a nice dude. But you know, you get a flavor that you don't like, and you can know pretty quick that you don't want to be a part of that at all. And that all comes from a 30-second conversation when you're having lunch with somebody that's supposed to be team building, and it is in fact the opposite of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I didn't know that story about you, but I knew the minute that you said you loved your boss and he was fired, I knew where the story was going.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, it was for me, at least, as someone who now is building something, it's an extra little sticky note on my what not to do and how to handle something like this does happen, kind of thing. It reminds me to always think, just be empathetical, like just don't be a d-bag. Like, at the end of the day,
I
like,
can't even believe she was there, to be honest. That was pretty brave.
they were all there. Everyone there, all the leadership, they were all at CPK enjoying their flatbreads and their
You're never going to
wines.
stop saying CPK now, huh?
No.
I will always forever call it CPK now. Yeah.
You're welcome.
Oh, man. I'm very worried. But I think that story just shows how important it is for the company culture, because company culture, honestly, in my opinion, is what makes it or breaks it for a company. And anybody who is in the chat, if you're hearing these stories, like I said before, if you have any questions, feel free to throw them at us as we continue with these rants of our own personal life around experiences. But I mean, as for culture, I guess my question comes down to you is like, what should a company actively do to facilitate a better culture? Because a lot of companies don't even know where to start, and that might be the reason behind it, is that they don't realize that they need to start building this culture. But what would be like the first step of even getting that started? What that process?
Well, so first of all, what do you mean by better?
I guess as in, like, how do you identify, like, what is the current culture, and then what should I make
culture change?
Yeah.
Yeah. Culture change is very difficult.
I know it is. It's very hard.
Not only is it, the times that we typically observe culture change is usually in these mergers and acquisitions, right? And two strong cultures coming together is probably the most difficult thing in terms of managing the due process and everything else that's involved in that. But let's say that you are an organization that's, fairly young, like you all within your organization here. And you recognize that there are some things that you definitely want to continue, and there are things that you might want to let go. I think ultimately, for larger organizations, you're obviously going to be primarily thinking about the vision from leadership. I mean, you can't escape the role that leadership has within the organization. Their vision, the way they behave, that interaction that you had with your organization, the way that they behave, I hate to say, we're still a little bit monkey see, monkey do, right? So we see leaders behaving this way. We think that's what's accepted and rewarded within this organization. And by the way, that's how you change culture, right? What's accepted and what's rewarded. So you kind of have to think about, and that's why I said reflect on where you currently are and where you want to be, because you need to consider the changes that are necessary to get to that point where you want to be, and also identify those barriers that are keeping you from getting there. And once you've identified those, and this isn't by any means the answer, right? This is one answer. Once you've identified those, kind of those barriers and those drivers, then you reward the drivers and you do everything that you possibly can to eliminate those barriers, right? And it becomes a little bit more sort of methodical in nature. And how do you keep it solidified? You continue, when individuals throughout the organization demonstrate this particular behavior, what do? You reward it, right? You celebrate the small wins. You celebrate those opportunities when your organization has achieved that end state that you hope that they would, right? And it's not overnight. I always run this exercise. You all didn't have me for organizational behavior, but just to demonstrate how difficult change is, try crossing your arms the opposite way to which you normally would, right? Rather than this, switch it around.
I don't even know how to do it properly.
Right. We're all doing it, right? And just feel that. Now, if I left you alone,
like that at all.
it doesn't feel good,
but it
right?
feels weird.
And if I left you alone, naturally, in the next minute or so, you're all going to release that position,
Is that a
right?
challenge or is it?
Yeah, well, let's see. Yeah, hold it for as long as you can.
Trying to make a very firm effort to grab myself here.
Yeah, that was a bit of a spoiler for 107, actually. So if you hadn't had that yet, it's coming.
So practicing now.
Yeah, exactly. Practice now, prove me wrong. So that level of discomfort will exist, and people will naturally go back to the things that they were most comfortable doing. This is why we find change so threatening, right, as individuals. What are we going to have to learn? What are we going to have to do differently now that these leaders want us to sort of change our approach? So maybe back to what you said at the very beginning is, how do we create that culture that thrives in innovation and mistake handling and creativity such that it's already instilled and you don't have to kind of think about where we're going because we're constantly going somewhere in the directed
way, yeah. I mean, yeah, because that the one thing that's interesting that I wish more companies, I mean, there's a cost to it. Like, a mistake is a cost to a company, and I 100% understand that. But like, one thing that like I'm trying to engrave into our company is trying something and failing at it like 3 to 4 times, and I already know they're going to fail at it 3 to 4 times before then they do it correctly, and then rewarding once they do it correctly, so then they can see that cycle and what process it takes to get there. Because a lot of times, and it goes back to what we talked about, imposter syndrome, it goes back to all these things. A lot of times you're looking at like, well, I can't do that. Well, why can't you do that? Well, because I've never done it before. Well, then how do you know if you can or cannot do it? And the only way you're going to figure that out is by trying, failing, learning, and then repeating that process. But I think failure, and that's one thing we're really heavy on, is like the concept of celebrating failure versus fearing failure. Because every single time you fail, you should take it, reflect, and you pretty much have 3 choices at that time. It's either this is not for me, I suck at this, I need another shot at it, or I just need to build up my confidence behind it, my skill sets behind it, kind of thing, because failure happens in so many different lenses. But from your research, have you noticed, I mean, we talked a little bit about like the senior management being put up because of failures, but have you seen that as a more growing trend, that companies are trying to look at making it more comfortable to fail, like overall, and like that correlates to growth? I don't know if there's a lot of research on that yet, but that's one thing I'm always very fascinated with, is like, is failure becoming more accepted within organizations because they know that leads to growth, but they always have to look at the cost associated with it, because every mistake, there's a cost.
I would say I have a few guests that you can bring onto the show that can answer that very well. So you're talking a bit more kind of macro level there. I think, in terms of my research, I'm not totally aware of instances for mistake handling. I would say from my own empirical kind of observations, it would be pretty rare. That's why this story is so fascinating, the one that we're writing up currently, because I think it is quite rare, especially as you reach those senior positions within organizations, for mistake handling to be so gentle and so kind of holistic in terms of, like you said, why did that occur? Kind of getting to the root of whatever that issue is and allowing for that level of experimentation. I would say probably happens in the lower levels of the organization, if an organization, again, is trying to drive that culture, such that when you reach those senior positions in the organization, perhaps mistakes won't be as prevalent. Not that they wouldn't be accepted, but perhaps not as prevalent.
Yeah, one thing that I keep wondering is, what can, like, for example, let's say the individual, what can the individual do to maybe, I don't think you can eliminate it, but to mitigate imposter syndrome?
Whoa.
Are we still doing group therapy or what?
No. Well, maybe, who knows? But yeah, what can my client
this guy,
do to
I know.
my
He has a
client?
mustache.
This guy, I know. No, it's
That we always told to shave his beard and
Yeah, I got shamed one time for having a beard or trying to. I did.
You
I
do
got
that to
shamed.
yourself.
You did that to
I
yourself.
didn't.
You
Literally,
posi-
you two shamed me.
Yeah, but you
Did
position
you feel
yourself
like an
for the
imposter having the beard, or
Well, afterwards, yeah. I came in because I had just I'd grown my facial hair out. And I said, you know what? I'm not going to shave it off today. I'm just going to kind of trim it up, make it look kind of nice. And I came in here and they looked at me like, what's wrong with you, man? Like, is everything all right? Is everything going good? Like, you need to get rid of that. Like, you can't have it.
and you caved?
I did.
I know.
I did cave. I caved because they said that we could only have, the way it works with our facial hair here is we have one beard, one patchy, and one mustache.
Okay,
That's how it works.
I like that.
That's how it works with the facial hair hierarchy here.
that's your branding.
Yeah, that's our branding here at the
Okay.
table. So I had to stay on brand.
Yeah,
Honestly.
I like that. Well, I would say, on a more serious note around the imposter syndrome, because I think if you have any human qualities, and I'm talking about anybody, if you have a human quality, it would be that kind of acceptance that you're not perfect, right? And I think that many people that do face that imposter syndrome are ones that have an extreme need for achievement, that they have never viewed themselves necessarily as reaching that utopia moment of achievement. And so I think in terms of handling it, I think it's worth reflecting, as you said, reflexivity, and I want to get back to that point at some point if we have time. But thinking about the reason you're there, right? Why have you been placed into this team? It's not by accident that your leader's like, oh, we need somebody. Yeah, he'll do, or she'll do, right? So it's not by accident that you have been placed into this position. And so remembering that thing, that resource, that quality that you have that will contribute to your team's effectiveness, perhaps will make you feel less of an imposter. Same as you move up the organizational hierarchy, right? And you're friends with people in the organization, and now you're managing those people that you used to be friends with, right? You feel even more, not necessarily as an imposter, but a bit of a traitor, right?
Yeah.
Moving into those upper management positions. So I would say it comes back to your core self-evaluation, right? Reflect on what is it about myself that's limiting me from believing that I belong there, and address that head on as best you can.
Yeah, I think that it's something that definitely isn't addressed too much. I don't think this like, at least within like our kind of generation, of this the idea of how to tackle and how to handle imposter syndrome, because everyone's going to go through it. I mean, I feel like most people, especially our age, are going through it currently, where there's always this weird idea floating in the back of your mind that's like, you don't belong here, regardless of whether or not that merit holds any water at all. It's like, when oftentimes it doesn't. It's just you kind of, I always come back to like this self-sabotage kind of thing. If you basically feeling like you don't deserve it, so then you try to make that a reality, which always just ends up backfiring in a multitude of different ways, whether that's you messing up a relationship, burning a bridge, or you actually like getting fired.
Yeah.
I think imposter syndrome is very similar to failure in the way that it should be approached. At least to me, it's more like, well, I've more recently realized that everyone goes through it in some way, shape, or form, and sometimes a lot. They just don't talk about it. Even like the most successful people are going through it every single day. And so what I realize is that it comes down to like a shift in mentality, kind of like flipping that switch basically from like, oh, I am scared, I can't do this, why am I here, to like, okay, I'm here for a reason and I'm going to try and learn so that I can get rid of this imposter syndrome and get good at where I am now. So I guess maybe that's another segment that we should start talking about imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
And it is important because it goes back to like learning how to reflect, because I dealt with imposter syndrome in June, because at that time we were dealing with like we're building out Free Logic Media, and I'm also building out Edge Sound Research. One has to become a high growth startup with like aiming to be a unicorn, and the other one's a consulting company, and I have to manage both and learn how to manage both, because there are different skill sets I have to be. And what I did was I realized at that time the reason why I had that imposter syndrome was because I thought I had to do everything alone, and I also thought that I didn't have the right skill sets for these certain areas. Like I was missing some pieces here and there, but then I was like, that's not true, because I have a support network. I can ask for mentorship. I can ask for support here and here. Free Logic is a team. Like, we have plenty of people that I can ask and we can look at different skill sets. But it took a month for me to like really reflect on it and really understand what I can do and what my strengths are and what I can do the best about, what I can't control, and then being comfortable not being able to control that. And I think that that lack of control is what people need to become comfortable with, because there's certain things you just cannot control. And if you are consistently thinking about them, it creates this feeling of imposter syndrome as well as anxiety, and it keeps building up.
Yep.
And that's I really wish that they taught this more like in school, especially in like high school and then college, because they teach you how to get a job and work, but not necessarily how to then manage yourself at that job and then progress. And that progression is more important than anything else, because especially our generation, we tend to forget, because of social media and these things and whatever everybody else is doing, is that we're really young. We can take as much risk as we want in our 20s and still be fine in our 30s.
Yeah.
It exponentially obviously gets harder as you get older, but we have time. And I wish people reflected on that and been like, okay, this is where I'm at right now. I might not be happy with it. I might be scared and all these factors, but I have time to grow. And if I'm growing day by day or year by year, you can pretty much do anything you want. But I think that's where students have this really weird disconnect, and especially from UCR students, because a lot of them are first generation students coming to college, going to the professional world, and they've never really experienced it. And UCR doesn't get recruited by companies like Deloitte all the time, or these big companies. So when someone lands that job there, they feel like, I'm not supposed to be here because I went to UCR. And I really, that's one thing that we try to push and have students understand, that that's not how you should feel. Like, UCR students are just as talented as a Harvard student. The only difference is sometimes the opportunity, the eliteness behind it, the clout behind it. But you can grow into that position. But I guess to put the question back on you, like, is there like a process for reflection? I think that it's a part for me that took a while to really figure out how to go about it personally, but I feel like it might be a personal thing. I don't think there's maybe a methodology behind it.
Yeah. First of all, I would say UCR students are just as, if not more talented than Harvard students. I'm a little biased, but and I'm glad that you brought up not only reflexivity, but also that idea of introspection, right? I encourage within my courses in particular, because I do buy into that. And I know that you've had some other professors on here that have that same kind of approach. So Rich and Jonathan also have that kind of view of how we develop our students specifically at UCR. And, sort of through my approach, I do encourage, and you probably remember this from 145 certainly, where I say at the very start of the class, this is your opportunity to experiment, right? This is your chance to design your team however you want, to try things out, to select individuals that you either really agree with, you get on with, or that you'll disagree with, that there are personality differences, that there are role differences, to utilize that time. So if there is one message to send out to current students, it is take advantage of this moment in time where you can experiment without having to worry about how my organization is going to respond to that mistake handling. The other side of that is around introspection. So even with me, and I know you all as well, probably have various sources that create your level of understanding of self, right? So I listen to various different podcasts that kind of coach you through sort of elements of yourself that you should constantly be thinking about, or at least maybe working on. And so I feel like in your classes as well, we do self-assessments, but never let that stop, right? Why would you enter an organization and say, oh, I know everything from college, and maybe you don't know anything from college, and maybe you don't remember what you learned in college. But why would you not take those self-assessments more regularly? Why would you not kind of continually reflect and understand where you fall with respect to your strengths and weaknesses? Personality is pretty stable, right? We know that. But how are my values shifting? What about my ability to lead and direct this team is being impacted by who I am? And can I work on that? There's so many revealing tools out there. I think Luis and we talked about one recently I think it was a strength finder kind of exercise where by the end we were almost both in tears realizing, you know,
I was like, oh my God,
this
I'm
is
not doing
much-
I'm not doing anything that makes me happy, like at all.
yeah, all of these
Thanks
things.
for that, by the way. I
Yeah.
appreciate you sending that my way.
My pleasure. I hope it helps.
Oh yeah, it did.
Good. But yeah, sometimes, and it comes back to what you said, like, am I doing things at work that I shouldn't be doing, you know, that have nothing to do with my expertise or talent? Are there other individuals in the organization that are actually better at that particular thing that should be doing it? Can I release my cognitive resource and my attention to that thing so that I can be more talented within my role?
Yeah. I think fear is, I think, the big thing. You know, I'm a huge, massive proponent of introspection. Like, I feel like I do it almost on a daily basis to a fault in the morning, you know, especially at night. But I think that the reason why a lot of people don't look within and really just see what's going on with them is the same reason, because of the same outcome that came from that, like your strengths and what you're doing right now, what you sent over, where you, if you're being honest with yourself, you identify that maybe you're not in the space that you want to be. Maybe you're not where you thought you could be.
Yeah.
And maybe you're doing something that doesn't make you happy or doesn't bring any sort of satisfaction in a meaningful way to you. Obviously, you're going to get satisfaction of very objective kind of things, but very subjective satisfaction, I think, is important as well. And I think that scares a lot of people, is looking in and realizing that, oh crap, I'm not happy. Like, I'm actually, like, if I'm looking at it from where I want to be, I'm not happy at all. This is not what I should be doing. And now I've wasted 5 years of my life, 10 years of my life, 20, 25 years of my life, doing this thing. What do I do now? I can't possibly change now. This is just the rest of my life. I just got to suck it up and keep doing this thing. I think that to me is the big kind of thing, is this fear of a lot of things, fear of finding out who you really are, finding out what makes you happy, and finding out that where you're at now is just not it.
Right. And that can always change.
Yeah.
Right. So, you know, you might have thought that you've, you know, reached this pinnacle moment in your life, and so you're set forever. And I think that's risky thinking as well, right? To kind of assume that you've made it to this position that you're satisfied with, and fail to reflect continuously. And I think that one thing that's quite revealing about that particular exercise, we can maybe get the resource for it. I don't know it off the top of my head, but
Yeah, I don't remember off the top of my head.
one of the things that's quite revealing about this particular exercise is it helps you to identify the things that you're paid for, right? So that talent that you have that you're paid to do. Now, as you just said, that doesn't mean that's the thing that's going to bring me satisfaction, right? You're constantly maybe receiving rewards for this thing. You're constantly getting, you know, salary increases for this particular thing. But at the end of the day, you're still not happy. So what is it, right? So that level of introspection is something that is useful for determining, you know, ultimately, you know, what career is right for me. And can you supplement that elsewhere if you can't find that particular career?
Yeah, I think, again, bias, but I think that the difference between a boss and a leader is introspection. It's, you have someone who either is going to just tell you what to do, a boss, or you're going to have a leader who's very much helping. It's a facilitator, exactly. And I think that comes through introspection 100% of the time.
Yeah.
So how do you go about introspection?
A lot of ways. I've brought it up a few times, but
Fear journal, right?
fear journaling is one of them. So I just look at what I'm scared of, which is a lot of things. Spiders is always the first thing I write down on my fear journal.
He roasting you on over-under?
Yeah.
Honestly,
yeah,
that's a fear for me too.
That's
I
a-
mean,
dude,
man, like
it's
we
not
turn around
okay.
on you all the time, so we're always worried about
it's not okay, man.
what kind of banter comes out of Nikhil's mouth.
So for those of you who don't know on the show, go watch 2 episodes of Over Under ago.
Like how you keep bringing people back to it.
Yeah, because I want them to see what fear looks like.
You have to look at fear right in the eyes.
Yeah, you got to look fear right in the eyes.
It's on
watch-
Professor
It's on
Rich's
YouTube. Yeah,
episode.
Professor Rich's episode. Watch the episode on YouTube and watch me crumble under Nikhil's. I don't even know what to call it. I don't want to say you're a bully, but might have been slight bullying.
It's okay.
No.
After all those Zoom meetings, like
That's true. We
Yeah,
did make
we're-
fun of you a lot.
This is fine. We're not going into that right now.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
continue with your.
Not next to an organizational behavior. It's
No,
not
I'm
happening.
interested. I'd rather be a fly on the wall.
So fear journaling is one of the ways that I do a lot of my introspection. But being very honest, like a lot of it comes from just me in my head, one of two ways. Sometimes when I run, I do meditative runs, which is it's when I just put on like classical music or like lo-fi hip hop or something that is just melodic and I can have it on the undertone.
Yeah.
And I just run and I think. And I usually just it's around the time that I start getting tired is when I start really asking like, how are you doing? How are you feeling? What's going on right now? Has this been a good week? Has this been a bad week? Things like that kind of ask yourself. And be very, I mean, at the end of the day, if you have to, it's this weird mentality that I had to get over personally, is when I first started doing fear journaling and introspecting and meditating and all this stuff, I would lie to myself. I was still not really letting go. And I think it's a common thing where you're sitting there and you're looking, am I okay right now? Very simple question. Is where I'm at, it was today a good week? Very easy one. Was today a good week for me personally? A lot of the times when you first start meditating and you first start introspecting and you aren't savvy to how honest you have to be, how brutally honest you have to be with yourself, you say, yeah. And that's really the end of it. You go, yep, it was a good week for me because of whatever reasons. It might be just one reason because that's the only thing that's the only tiny lock holding the floodgate of all the bad things that were there. But I would argue and I would tell this to anyone who's listening is if you're going to be introspecting, you're just lying to yourself isn't going to get you anywhere. Right. Being dishonest with yourself, trying to make up this false narrative in your own brain, like tell someone that. Like don't tell yourself that. Like I can, like if you ask me like, hey, is it a good week? I'm not just gonna start crying and be like, no man, it's been really bad. like yeah, it's been alright. You know. Yeah. Depending on the level of friendship and where you're at, obviously you can be a bit more candid. But with yourself, I think there should always be 100% transparency and honesty. Fear journaling is, I think the quickest way to do it. And if you're ready for some hardcore stuff, just sit down and just think. And more often than not, you're just sitting there and you're going, well, there's a lot rattling on in there that is not okay.
Yeah, no, it's so important to be honest with yourself. And I think that's the hump that a lot of people, it's hard to get over. And once again, going back, social media does cause this problem that a lot of people they're so afraid to like look at themselves internally. They're looking externally. They're looking at what other people are achieving and what other people are doing because they're feared. Then they are afraid to look at themselves because then they don't want to be honest with themselves, like where I'm at right now. Yeah. And that's more important than anything else because if you can't be honest with yourself, you can't grow. And that's my entire kind of perspective on it because that's what I learned in my undergrad was how to be honest with myself. And during my MBA time, it was more of like how do I then grow from there. But it took 4 years for me to like really become honest with myself and like look at this is where I want to be. This is what I'm doing. This is what I'm actually good at. This is what I suck at. And going from there. But it's not easy. And anybody who like listening to this, like it's a process, but you have to start. You have to start somewhere. And then slowly you'll build out and be more and more honest with yourself. But I guess for the main topic we want to talk about is your research. I don't want to leave out here without talking a little bit about your research. So I mean, you introduced in the beginning. Can you go a little bit more into detail about what you're specifically researching?
Yeah, so there's some interesting things that I've looked into over the years. I said the relational ambivalence construct kind of came out of my PhD, and interestingly, you know, we were talking about who this would pertain to, right? So. I was actually working with auditors, and you think, man, because we were talking about accountants, right? So auditors, well, it turns out even auditors care about the relationship that they have with their manager, and they care about the relationships that exist in the organization. And I actually conducted interviews with the auditors before I kind of began to understand a little bit more about sort of the issues that I was interested in. And first and foremost, it's amazing when you go into an organization as an outsider and the type of information people will reveal to you.
Oversharing is the thing.
It's an overshare, right?
Yeah.
And it does become these really interesting sessions where you find out, especially when you start talking about bosses and managers and leaders throughout the organization, I'm not I'm not a threat to them. I'm just a researcher. I'm not going to make any changes based on, the things that I'm doing. And in fact, I promised them that, right? Complete anonymity. And so they talk about really interesting things that are occurring with their leadership in the organization. And for me, and this is probably not all that surprising, is the discrepancy between what leaders think is happening and what those at the grassroots think is happening is so far. It's so different. And in fact, I had to be very careful with the conversation. I was riding around in the CFO's, chauffeured car for all these interviews, which felt a little bit like a traitor. But, from each of the kind of campuses, and riding around with him and hearing him say, this is my view on some of the issues that are happening here. And I bet they're going to say this. I bet they're going to say that, right? And then having those personal interviews with these employees and realizing the difference and the importance of the type of research I was doing. So I wanted to understand that gray area, right? To seek out and determine whether or not individuals might have these relationships that are comprised of love and hate is a little extreme, right? So I don't think love and hate is exactly what is being identified here, but it's certainly a type of relationship whereby you've had so many sort of instances or experiences that are positive with that particular individual who is leading you in their organization, and instances whereby these individuals have behaved quite negatively, right? So imagine being praised by the same boss who, in a team meeting then kind of undermines you publicly, right? And these things add up. Why? Because we're paying attention to the way in which leaders treat us, because they're in control of a very important resource, not just our sort of our money, our pay and promotion, but also the extent to which we feel as though we belong to the organization, that we feel a part of it. We know if we're part of the inner circle of our leaders in our organization, then we feel like we belong more with the organization, that we're safe and we have strong relationships. So through some of these interviews and then beginning to collect data, I uncovered that there was a huge, about 30% of individuals that I was looking into that actually had these relationships that I later described as being ambivalent. So when something is ambivalent, we value both to be strong. So negative and positive, we value about the same. And so I would literally ask them, think about this quality of your leader. How favorable do you view them with respect to that particular thing? Something like communication, something like trust, something like appreciation, levels of appreciation, whatever. And then in a totally separate screen, I ask the exact same question and I say, how unfavorably do you view that particular thing? How negative? What is your experience with that particular characteristic across those dimensions? And so then you calculate, you use a really an interesting sort of a split semantic differential technique, to get technical here, to determine the calculation.
No idea what that means, but I like it.
I had to nerd out.
Say it one more time.
Split semantic differential technique.
Yes.
The enjoyment in that.
The enjoyment, and how many times as a PhD student I memorized that, right? But that idea that particular thing allows you to calculate the strength and the intensity of the ambivalence that those individuals are feeling toward their leader. So there are things that lead up to that. I was interested in what creates those types of relationships. Interestingly, I love that you brought up kind of attachment earlier in your parents. I know that you weren't disclosing anything personally there, but we do care about the way in which we were raised. Most of us, do care deeply about that. And so I wanted to see from pure psyching out on this one, the extent to which kind of our adult attachment styles created certain relationships with our leaders in our organizations. And not surprisingly, we won't go into the detail, but secure attachment, great relationships with their boss, and preoccupied, the one where your parents are kind of there for you but kind of not. That preoccupied adult attachment style turns out had a very strong relationship with feeling ambivalence toward your leader in your organization. But other things mattered more. A couple things mattered more. The extent to which your leader helped you feel as though you belong with the organization turned out to be a nice contributor. But more than anything, it was the way in which your leader behaved. How consistent was your leader in terms of the way in which they interacted with you on a daily basis, right? So recognizing, again, like I said before, that idea that we're monitoring our leader's behavior. We want to know where we fit within this organization. So the managers that were consistent in terms of their favorable treatment obviously created these positive relationships. Managers that were consistently negative created these negative relationships. And then those inconsistencies in terms of how managers created these relationships ultimately led to ambivalent relationships. Probably the most exciting outcome from all of this, a couple of things. One that you hit on earlier is rumination. So imagine you don't know where you stand with your leader in your organization. You don't know if you love them. You don't know if you hate them. You don't know if they love you. You don't know if they hate you. And so what turns out happening is I measured on a daily basis. So I did what's called a diary study technique. I measured on a daily basis the extent to which these individuals were thinking about and ruminating about the relationship that they had with their leader. And more so, obviously, more so than any other group, these individuals were constantly thinking about that relationship. And why that's important for organizations is because when we're ruminating, what are we not doing? We're not performing. We're not able to come up with those innovative ideas. We're not able to sort of be creative and kind of achieve the things that we're meant to achieve for the organization. So that was a huge outcome. And then more fascinating than the rest of that was we actually went back 6 months later and collected actual turnover data. So these are individuals that have decided to leave the organization. Amongst the positive, the great relationships, the horrible bosses, and the ambivalence, the ambivalent individuals were more likely to leave the organization than even those who had a horrible boss that they knew was horrible and accepted that they were horrible. So that ambivalence, it's a subset of cognitive dissonance. So that level of ambivalence that you get from not knowing where you are, just think about your boyfriends, your girlfriends, your husbands and wives. Hopefully you're not ambivalent toward your husband or wife. But just think about those friends that you have when you don't know what that relationship is and how uncomfortable that is and the extent to which that relationship can actually last into the future. This research has been extended by other researchers who have found that even being in the presence of somebody who causes those ambivalent attitudes in you increases your heart rate. Immediately in their presence, you feel your heart rate increase because that unpredictability exists in that relationship. So we don't want bosses that create that, right? Maintaining an ambivalent relationship with somebody is so excruciating for people that they seek to get out of it. We also found that they are looking for cues to get out of that relationship. And it turns out they don't care if it's positive. That next interaction with their boss, they don't care if it's positive or negative. They just want to get out of that excruciating state of ambivalence. And sometimes they can't resolve it and thereby end up exiting the organization.
Wow.
Super interesting.
That actually blew my mind because that makes so much sense, but I've never really thought of it in that way because those that like have a genuine hate for their bosses, they've at least accepted that.
Exactly.
Those that are kind of in the mid ground, I can see that because it's a distraction for them.
Yeah.
I just never really thought of it that way. I always thought of it as like if I'm just dissatisfied, I'm leaving. But that does make a lot of sense that those are kind of in the no man's land are more likely to make that decision, say like this is maybe not the fit for me and I'm going to look for my next opportunity because they haven't necessarily accepted which way they want to go. Wow.
Yeah. I feel like it's like no one likes lukewarm.
No.
You know, and I think at the end of the day, that's what it comes down to. It's like I would rather be really hot or really cold.
Some lukewarm coffee, like
lukewarm coffee. No one wants it. Either iced coffee or hot coffee. No one wants a room temp
you're
coffee.
gonna be spitting that out.
Yeah. And then, as well with that is like, to quote the Lumineers, a song of an artist. It's the opposite of love is indifference. It's like it's not hatred. It's literally just not caring. And I think it speaks volumes to your research there.
Yeah, and I'm actually glad you brought up the term indifference because that was one thing that we wanted to differentiate, right? So indifference is not caring at all, whereas ambivalent people are still in that category of caring. They want to be able to determine what this relationship is. So we actually have a typology around kind of the extent to which you're feeling that relationship as being high or low and positive or negative kind of experiences. And the low, negative, low positive, I've given up on this relationship, right? I don't care enough. I feel indifferent. And of course the high representing ambivalence.
You got anything over there? I feel
I
like you're
talk about rumination.
No, I'm just like, whoa. Yeah, no, I got nothing.
We need to go to CP. What is it? CPK.
Yeah, we gotta go
we need
CPK
to go
after this.
CPK after this and
Work it
get
all
some
out.
Long Island iced teas and really work through it.
Yeah.
What are we in right now? Oh, we're almost at 2 hours.
Wow,
Ooh.
that was fast.
Flew by. Are we doing a story?
We're doing a story. Did you prep?
I did not.
Of course you did, Luis. All right.
Oh my-
No. So the way that we always end our shows, since this has been a therapy lesson for all of us and in general, is we always end it with a failure story from our guests. So the reason why we always like to end it with a failure story, and Luis was supposed to prep you for this, but
Hey,
I barely knew where to go.
true.
Sounds
I pinned him a location, and I was like, just show up here.
Yeah.
all right. So Kat, from now on, you're running these. We're not gonna let him do any of this organization.
We'll find the guests. Just it was a lot going on this week. I was sober for like 5 minutes of this week.
All right, so yeah. So aside from that, yeah. So the reason why we always end it with a failure story is we like to really show that everybody's gone through, in some point in their life, some kind of failure. It can be big or small, but usually those change trajectories in one way, shape, or form. And it's always up to, you can share whatever you want to share. I mean, we had Professor Rich shared about his time in high school in golfing. Jonathan Lim shared about him teaching for the first time and getting terrible reviews. So
I find that hard to believe.
I do too. I mean, like, he's a fantastic professor, but it's very illuminating because especially for our audience, since they're a lot younger, they might not have gone through that failure yet, and we really want to showcase that you shouldn't necessarily fear it, but once you are in that state of failure, how do you react to it? That's why we really want to be able to showcase.
Right. So, I can kind of think of two examples, but one's a little bit maybe more poignant, more relevant for students. So, and I've actually shared this with some of my students in the past, which is when I did my first internship. So, just finished at university and took on my first internship in HR. I had started this internship about 6 months after another intern, right? And her name was Roxanne. And I'll never forget Roxanne. Roxanne, are you out there? Roxanne Bartek. I don't know. I think her name's changed. Anyway, she was working for this organization 6 months prior. And, as you do, you form good relationships with the other interns. And we were doing similar work, almost the exact same work. About when I started, she received a raise. I don't know how big it was. I can't even remember to this day. And so she was very excited about that, obviously being rewarded by the organization. She's doing something right? And she said, I don't know. I was doing my job well. So, if it's anything like, what happened with me, then in 6 months' time, you'll probably get a raise as well, right? Planting a seed in my head that in 6 months' time, what's going to happen to Kyle, that I'm going to get this raise, right? So what didn't happen in 6 months for me? I didn't get the raise, right? And I was so angry, and I was young, right? 21, I think I was. I was so angry and upset over the fact that I didn't get this raise that I did the one thing that you shouldn't do, which is I emailed my boss.
Just a glass of wine in one hand and
I'm 21 now.
One-handed typing with the other on the old.
One eye in it. Yeah. So I wrote this very angry email to my boss saying, this is how I feel about the fact that I didn't get a raise. Something that the organization never promised me. It was just a sidebar conversation with another intern. Now, I was very lucky because this boss she called me into her office the next day. And she said, this email that you just sent, let's talk about that because I could fire you right now, is basically what she said. However, I'm not, and here's why. And this is why I think that mistake handling is so important for organizations. First of all, never write an angry, emotional email. I was lucky. I could have been fired that day. But it actually led to not only appreciation for how I would want to lead in an organization, the way she handled that, and to say, this is how we're going to learn and grow from this opportunity. But then it also introduced me to this whole realm of research that I didn't know exists around the psychological contract. which is expectations that we have about our organization that are just in our mind and created by things that the organization has never promised us. And then we react just like I did to a broken promise, even though a promise was never made. So I was lucky in that bad example and that negative experience. But it was the wrong thing to do. Definitely a fail on my side.
So from this experience, do you think that was kind of a spark to wanting to get your PhD, wanting to pursue where you are now?
Absolutely. Yeah. I found it extremely interesting that particular phenomenon had occurred within that organization. And so when I went to study my master's, at the time I didn't know I wanted to do a PhD. So I went and did a master's in IO psychology, and we had to work on a thesis. And I was like, I'm going to uncover what in the world happened in that relationship. Why was I so angry over that particular thing? And it spawned my, kind of research approach. The other area of research we didn't talk about is around how do we handle conflict within organizations? How do we respond to broken promises? And then I uncovered the fact that this term I just said a minute ago, there's a name for it. It's called a psychological contract breach, and it happens all the time. For me, it led into really great things. Yeah.
Would you have any final advice for anybody who is dealing with failure then, based off of your experience and how that's allowed you to propel in your life?
I mean, I think it sounds probably cliche to say, but it gets better, and you will always learn from these experiences and continue to learn from those experiences. That failure, going back to the fear thing, what would you do if you were not afraid, right? That's my advice that I would leave with students and anybody who's listening, is really reflect and do a bit of introspection on how would I respond in the situation? How would I behave if I was not afraid? I even had this in when we were in the live lecture theater for 107, when I'm teaching 300 students at a time. In my mind, I actually said, I'd really like to play music before the lectures. And then I thought, all this fear came up. Oh, what if they judge me? What if they don't like my music? What if they, whatever. And then I was like, well, actually answer the question. What would you do if you weren't afraid? And I was like, screw it. I'm going to play the music. And it turns out it changes the atmosphere. It changes the environment, and students feel much more comfortable. So that bit of advice is one thing that I would certainly leave. But also recognizing those moments that when you do fail, growth is there. So much growth on the other side will come out of that experience.
Awesome. I definitely appreciate that. And to kind of give you the opportunity to get more students enrolled in your classes. I
don't want any more. No, I'm just kidding.
Which classes are you planning on teaching or are scheduled to teach for next quarter?
So OB is a foundational course which everybody takes, and I'm so pleased to be in charge of that class because I think I take every effort to kind of manage the foundations of what you should know going into your upper division electives. On top of that, I teach designing and leading teams, which is BUS 145, and then I teach leadership development, which is 156, and sometimes over the summer I'll teach managing human resources, but that's not always the case, so that's Biz 155. I will also kind of, if you don't mind, also say to those that are currently enrolled in OB or any other courses at UCR, I'm taking a group of students to London, COVID willing, right? Get rid of this COVID thing. To London this summer, and those are 8 credits for Biz 145 and 156.
Oh, nice.
So we'll do those 2 classes right in the heart of London. So
Nice.
Nice.
please
Awesome.
come along for that.
And highly recommend it, especially after COVID, due to the fact that traveling is going to change your perspective of everything. So
Yep.
we always
100%.
encourage studying abroad, traveling, getting out there. Obviously with COVID, don't do it right now, but do it in the summertime, hopefully, when it is doable.
You should learn to say cheers in as many languages as you possibly can.
Indeed.
Absolutely, yeah. That's important. That's important. My rule of thumb is every country I go to, I at least have to find their local beer.
Yeah.
But that's aside for a point. We'll do another episode on that another time.
Beers
But
around the world.
but as for that, that's been the main show for today. We still have our over and under afterwards, where you can see our very uneducated opinions about things. And I hope you have some
Yes.
good topics that you have.
I do.
planned.
I have some pre-planned topics that I've definitely already written. I have a few asks here. I have a few asks, Val. If you are someone who has Amazon Prime,
That's a good ask, actually.
This is a good ask. If you are someone who has Amazon Prime, or if you are on someone's Amazon Prime account and they are not a user of Twitch, our ask is that you use your Amazon Prime, you link it to your Twitch, and you get one free subscription every month. It's called Twitch Prime. It doesn't cost you anything, but it really helps support the show. If you have Amazon Prime, you just link your account. It's very easy, and then you go onto our channel and just click the subscribe icon. Again, completely free, and it really helps support the show. Along with that,
actually, let me jump into one thing before you go into your second point on that. And those that would like to subscribe to our channel in general and can't afford to do so, we would highly appreciate it, because that money goes to be able to build out this platform, to be able to get more guests, to be able to get more writers. So if you like our content, that also really does help us out. So one's the free route, and appreciate that very much. But if you want to go the pay route, we also very much appreciate that, because that goes directly to us being able to build out this platform. But now, continue your second point.
Yeah, so to that point, visit thebrew.tv. That is the site that you will see a lot of what we do here in a more written format. So supporting this show through Twitch just helps us really get more talent to help us with thebrew.tv. And also make sure you subscribe to our newsletter. Right now, we're just in collect email mode until we pull the trigger on the first actual newsletter. But yeah, we're trying to get that list decently well, and then we have some things in store as well for that newsletter that are pretty exciting, I think. But yeah, that's really it. Just subscribe to all of our social platforms.
And subscribe to our newsletter, because we will be sending a follow-up email that has all our social links on there, so you can follow us on all our social platforms. But in general, all our social platforms are Free Logic Media as of right now, so go follow us across the board. It helps us out a lot. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed our conversation for today. Stay tuned. In about 5 minutes, we're going to transition really quickly to overrated, underrated, and having a lot more banter. It's not going to be as educational, but hopefully you'll learn something from that. So
it's gonna be the fun stuff, which I'm excited about. I'm always here for a bantery time.
Yep. All right, sounds good.